the legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My bipartisan legislation, H.R. 5226, the Regulatory Integrity Act, promotes transparency and accountability during the formal rulemaking process. It requires agencies to post in a central location all the public comments they issue during the proposed rule stage. The bill further prohibits agencies from actively soliciting support for what should be a neutral, open comment process, and requires agencies to tell the public whether they are considering alternatives or soliciting feedback during the proposed rule stage. Trust in government is among its all-time low, in part because of overreaching and unaccountable bureaucracies that too often push the boundaries of their authority. These same agencies issue thousands of new regulations and imposed billions of dollars in regulatory costs on the American people. Already in 2016, the administration has imposed $63 billion in new regulatory costs and proposed an additional $16 billion. Agencies are supposed to genuinely consider comments from the public and incorporate reasonable changes, but oftentimes they're just going through the motions. At worst, agencies may tilt the balance in their favor by actively campaigning for their original proposal. We saw this play out during the EPA's Waters of the U.S. rulemaking process. The EPA undertook a public campaign to solicit support for what they claimed was a proposed rule. The agency used social media to undermine the purpose and spirit of the rulemaking process by condensing a complex, costly, and controversial proposed rule down to a misleading talking point. By asking for support before the rule was finalized, it was clear that EPA had already prejudged the outcome of its rulemaking. The Nonpartisan Government Accountability Office concluded the EPA overstepped and issued a report that said the agency undertook, and I quote, covert propaganda and, quote, grassroots lobbying during the process. Those are strong words. Although the EPA is the latest example, it is certainly not alone. In our last markup, the committee reported S. 1109, which addressed problems with agencies overselling settlement agreements as prosecutorial successes by providing transparency into settlements and providing reasonable requirements to how the agency communicates about the settlement. H.R. 5226 builds on that bipartisan framework to address similar problems with agencies overselling proposed regulations at a time when they ought to be listening to the public with an open mind. The rulemaking process must be transparent and accountable to ensure that the final rule is effective and well-reasoned, but also that the public believes the process was legal and fair. The Regulatory Integrity Act is needed to ensure that all federal agencies adhere to the letter and the spirit of the law by remaining neutral arbiters during the rulemaking process. This bipartisan legislation is supported by several members of this committee, as well as by the American Farm Bureau, Michigan Farm Bureau, and the NFIB. I urge all my colleagues to support this good government bipartisan bill. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings, for his statement on the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I agree that more transparency